Welcome back. Do you have a child or perhaps a grandchild who maybe needs some extra help in school because they learn differently? Well, this morning we're joined by attorneys Melissa Gagne and Jennifer Laviano. They're from the law firm Laviano and Gagne. They are sharing some important information about how to ensure those children get the help they need. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Good morning.
Good morning. So you specialize in helping people with special education needs. And we wanted to have you on. We're here at the beginning of the school year, and certainly most of our viewers may have questions but don't need a lawyer. And I want you to talk in a minute about when you might need a lawyer. But if someone's maybe observing a child who just needs something more than the help they're being given or needs some more resources, Jennifer, I'll start with you. What are the questions they should be asking?
So they should be asking where children are expected to be at that grade or in that age, in a number of areas. Academic, obviously, so you want to know where should my child be reading at this point in their education, mathematics, those basic skills. But there are other things besides academics that special education and education in general covers, which are things like coping skills, emotional skills, social skills. So if you feel that your child or your grandchild or someone that you're working with is behind in one of those areas, you should be asking where should they be right now. That's a good starter question anyway. And
figure out what sort of that benchmark is and if they're there.
Exactly.
And I know you got into this field of law practice because of your dad, who had a history of this. And Melissa, you have a 27-year-old son who's profoundly autistic, and you were in education before you got into this. So do you understand if somebody's watching this saying, you know, the kind of assessment that Jennifer just described, I need that? Is that a common thing that you can sympathize or empathize with these parents?
Absolutely. So I always say the meeting that you have with the school when there is potentially a concern, when maybe even for the first time you're meeting with the team to discuss perhaps whether your child might be eligible for special education services. It's called a PPT meeting, a planning and placement team meeting. And there are different people that have to be at the meeting. And so I've been at that meeting as the parent for the child, for my son Ryan, who's now 27. I've also been the teacher at that meeting. I've been the principal at that meeting. So I always tell my clients I've sat at every seat at that PPT table now as the attorney.
Is it sometimes that parents maybe know deep down that their child needs that, but they're afraid to ask? Is that a big first step, that the parent just needs to say, hey, I need help here?
I think some of it is that. I think sometimes they don't know what to ask, and I think sometimes they aren't comfortable enough to approach the school team. They're maybe nervous that their child, potentially has some sort of a disability, and they may not even realize that it's the school team that they should be reaching out to. Sometimes they'll go and reach out to their private providers also. But it's a combination of not knowing what to ask, maybe being afraid to ask, and really maybe not even knowing who to ask at the school.
So let's say, Jennifer, you do that, kind of look at that benchmark and where your child should be, and you talk to the teachers and say, okay, I think my son or daughter is behind. Then what are the next questions you should be asking?
So depending on how far behind you think your child is or what your concerns are, you have a right, an absolute right, to ask the school district to convene the PPT meeting that Melissa was talking about. It's called a referral to special education. Most of the time there are what we call pre-referral strategies, which means before we go ahead and identify a child as requiring special education services, we want to make sure we've not, overlooked something that maybe isn't a disability. And so you go through those steps, but you don't want to be doing that for months and months and months or years and years and years. And further to Melissa's point, we tell parents, trust your instincts. If something is telling you that your child, something's wrong or not going right, or they're behind in some way, you're probably right. Because as parents, we all want our children to be doing beautifully. That's our natural instinct as a parent. And when you just feel that there's something off, we hate hearing from parents 5-10 years later, I wish I had called somebody earlier. And again, we don't think that most people need lawyers, okay? That's not the point I'm making. But when parents don't listen to their instincts, they often regret it. So listen to your instincts.
And, using your son again as an example, a parent of a profoundly autistic child for sure knows that they need services. But I'm thinking that there's probably a big spectrum of things that are available, and maybe a child just needs a little tiny bit of services. Is that something that a parent should be asking, Melissa?
For sure, and it depends on the circumstances. So for example, a child may be significantly behind, let's say in the area of reading. at school, and the school has exhausted their resources to try to provide certain interventions for that child. It may very well be that after doing some further investigation and evaluations that it's determined there's a learning disability in the area of reading, and so perhaps that child, the team develops what's called an individualized education program for that specific child in the area of reading only. And it may just be that that child requires services weekly, 30 minutes with a specialized teacher in the area of reading, and that might be their whole program. Again, it's individualized for a reason. It's based on what that individual child may or may not need.
So certainly, hopefully a lot of people who are watching have gotten a lot of things to think about. When do you cross the line, Jennifer? When is it time to maybe get a lawyer involved?
Okay, so there are some circumstances where I would say you really need to at least be consulting with an attorney because your situation has gotten urgent. One is if your school district is bringing their lawyer to your meetings, you definitely should not be in a situation where you're there without counsel, in my opinion. If your child's up for an expulsion and they have a disability or they're suspected of having a disability, they have a number of rights, and there's a process that is supposed to be triggered, but most families are not aware of it, so probably you should be on the phone with an attorney. If your child has a disability or is suspected of having one and is hospitalized, and I don't mean hospitalized because of some accident or something, but mental health issues we know they're through the roof these days, and many children who are suspected of having what we call an emotional disability show signs for a long time, and then the crisis is a hospital. In those circumstances, your child might need a very intensive program quickly, and that's a crisis. So you might want to at least, again, consult with an attorney. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need one. We have very good relationships with a lot of the school districts in Connecticut, and we'll say, your special ed director is very reasonable. You don't need us. Call them directly, say that you spoke to us, and they'll understand what you need to do, and you just got to sometimes go to somebody who really is the top of the chain if you're in a crisis. Those are the circumstances. If you're looking for what we call an outplacement, which means you're asking your school district to support your child going to a private special education school, usually you're going to probably need an attorney unless the school's already going to you and saying, we think your child needs an outplacement.
Wicked good advice. I only have 10 seconds left,
Okay.
Melissa. Do you have to have a specialized special ed attorney? Like, is that a key thing if you're in this area? Like someone who specializes in special ed?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a niche, a highly specific, specialized area of law.
All right. Well, I'm glad we have two specialists here to talk about it. Hopefully, parents learned a lot of stuff. Jennifer Laviano, Melissa Gagne, thank you for being with us here on CT23.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.